Just over a year ago, I made a video about how despairing I was when the Remainers in Parliament had basically just kidnapped democracy and assumed it to themselves, and I was despairing because it all seemed to be quite legal, and they seemed to have the law on their side somehow. And it was and then that was a low point, and but it was somewhat assuaged by the general election of 2019 in December. And like many people, I had great hopes for Johnson, and the sort of revolt of ordinary people against the establishment. So that turned into a high point, which lasted until March, and then everyone forgot about Brexit. And we heard about this new disease that was supposed to be so dangerous. And here we are, 12 or 13 months later, going into another ruinous lockdown on pretty dodgy evidence as far as I can see. And it's really, here I am again feeling despair. The lockdown was announced yesterday, so I have a bit of time to think about it. And it's difficult. I mean, I've been a bit tongue-tied about this, really, because I'm really not quite sure what to say about it, other than the obvious thing that I always say to the regular 1,000 people I always say something to, who tend to just agree with me anyway. So it's in my own echo chamber. I am I'm in an oasis of people who seem to value freedom, and of course that is just my echo chamber. And I go out to the shops and everyone's wearing a mask, and you look at the supposedly the opinion polls that supposedly said that everyone supports the lockdown. Now, I mean, even if you leave aside the evidence of the lethality of the disease, and even leaving aside matters of freedoms and civil liberties and actually just living in a free society, if you just ignore that for a minute, you just focus on, let's just focus on just the economics of it. I mean, our borrowing in September of 2019 was in the region of £44 billion. Our borrowing this year is over 210 billion. That's 5 times what it was. It's beyond my comprehension that we can ever afford this. Economics doesn't make a lot of sense at the best of times. When governments just invent money and just print it, or even just invent figures on a computer screen. It doesn't seem to have any real connection to the real world, and that's in the normal run of things. And even in a relatively abnormal time, like in the financial crisis 2008, which was supposedly even worse of a financial crisis than the Great Depression of the 1930s. That's just a drop in the ocean compared to what this is. I mean, I've never been one of those what would you call it, one of those taxpayer alliance types who is endlessly fretting about wasted taxpayers' money. You know, and there is wasted taxpayers' money. I mean, that's just part and parcel of living in a democracy and a free society. You know, money does go missing. It gets wasted. It gets frittered away. But maintaining a free society is expensive. You know, and I've always kind of taken that view. You know, I mean, obviously I don't want money to be wasted, but I've always been quite sanguine about it. You know, as a friend of mine was saying, you know, we all complain about how much tax we pay. You just try visiting a country and where nobody pays any tax. You know, people die in the street. You know, so I've always been quite sanguine about that. But when I hear that they're thinking of spending £100 billion on testing, never mind that they're spending all that money on a disease that has got a 99.94% survival rate. Just the bare figures, £100 billion. And that's almost enough to run the entire NHS for a whole year. How are we ever going to afford this? I mean, economics doesn't seem to make a lot of sense at the best of times. You know, with government issuing bonds and people buying the debt and all the rest of it, you know, and not really quite sure who is buying the debt and who do we owe it to. I mean, it doesn't make very much sense to a layperson, you know. But that's just in normal times, or even relatively abnormal times, like a financial crisis. But now it's just off the scale. There's no way that we can stand this for very much longer. And now we've got another 28-day lockdown. You know, this started in March. 3 weeks to flatten the curve. Remember that? And it's a strange thing, this freedom, because we tend to think of freedom as being, because we've grown up with it, we tend to think of it as being normal. But it isn't normal. It's unusual. I mean, it's actually beautifully, exquisitely rare. And we really are fortunate to have been born into it. But because of that, and because we haven't had to fight with it, we have all taken it for granted. And as I continue to rail against, you know, one of the biggest enemies of freedom is surveillance. And yeah, people, you know, they put up CCTV cameras, ANPR cameras, starting to roll out facial recognition, and then this sort of ridiculously crap track and trace thing that they're trying to do. You know, they're not going to be happy until all of us are barcoded. And they give them these sort of euphemistic names, track and trace, like it's a normal, rational, sensible thing to do. That we can't have people just wandering around without us knowing where they are. I mean, I've written a great big long spiel here about trying to present clever arguments and stuff, but you know, I've had a bit of, you know, I've had a fair amount of writer's block with this because, you know, I don't actually know what to say to change anybody's minds. I mean, I make all these videos and I put my heart and soul into them, and you know, it seems as if the same 1,000 people watch them all the time, you know, and I think that's half of the problem, is that we're only talking to each other. You know, we've got to get out and we've got to start talking to other people at the risk of ridicule, and that is, you know, being English. We're all a bit afraid of ridicule. We're all a bit afraid of being branded as the tinfoil hat wearers. But you know, that's just something we're going to have to get over. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you know, for the sake of my free society, I'm quite prepared for people to laugh at and ridicule me in the street if that brings our freedoms back. I don't care if they laugh and point at me and point me out to their children. You know, I don't care. I don't care about that. You know. But what we do have to do is, you know, and one of the things that I would sort of request that people who are watching this might consider, because I'm trying to do it myself, and you know, I don't know what is the most persuasive thing to put, is to print out some leaflets and start handing them out, because you're not going to get to them through social media. You know, you're not going to get to the great majority of people who still watch the television and still read the newspapers and still believe that cases means people that are ill. And won't listen to the fact that the PCR tests are horrendously unreliable. You know, we've just got to get people to start looking at the evidence. I mean, my feeling is, particularly where I live, that people will be attracted by will be arrested by the fact of the amount of money that's being spent. You know, I mean, capitalism isn't doing what it's supposed to do. You know, it's always been slightly a world of smoke and mirrors, you know, particularly since the financial crisis. But it just seems like, you know, what might have happened in Zimbabwe. We'll get hyperinflation, you know, and people pushing money around in a wheelbarrow. Or in Weimar, Germany, and we know what happened after that. You know, and I suppose that we kind of, in a way, we kind of deserve what we get, really. You know, I converse with people who, they just sort of believe that this, that the restrictions on our liberty are sort of no big deal. You know, they don't actually seem to think that there's anything special in, you know, being able to speak one's mind and go where one pleases and mix with whomever you want, you know, without the say-so of the government. They seem to think, well, this is sort of normal, this is okay. And people talk about the restrictions that Boris mentioned just, I wish I wouldn't call him Boris, fucking the Pfeffel, that he mentioned yesterday. And they're immediately trying to clarify it. Oh, what does it say we're allowed to do? Oh, was it? I'm allowed to see this many people and not this many. Oh, because I've got to get it straight in my mind. Because I've got to follow. I've got to follow the rules. No matter that they make no sense, or that they are profoundly illiberal. They just want to, oh, what am I allowed to do? And that's just the point, we should be allowed to do anything except the things that supposedly harm other people. And of course that is what the excuse is that anything we do, i.e. meet people in the street, brush past them in the street, shake hands, everything we do is now potentially damaging. And because it is now potentially damaging, it is now within the purview of the state to say whether or not we can or can't do it. And maybe they're right. Maybe this virus is more dangerous than I think. Maybe that I am misreading the data. Maybe I am cherry picking it. But in a way, I kind of hope the disease, I kind of hope it is as serious as they say. Because if we are going to give up our liberties, I want it to be for something and not for nothing. I want to be wrong. I want to be wrong that we're going to get our freedoms back. I mean, it's a very nebulous concept, freedom. You can't really get your hands on it. In China, freedom probably just means not going hungry. Freedom from want. Which is maybe why they've rolled over so easily for the social credit system, because, the state has basically said, we'll take care of you. You'll be well fed and watered, and you can have a few nice things like a flat screen telly. And in return, you don't try and clamber out of the padded cell. It's different for them, I guess. It's different. Their history is different. I don't like to judge. And of course, the Hong Kong Chinese, they weren't having that, were they? And this is one of the things that makes me even more depressed, is that, if you protest in this country, you're not going to get imprisoned and tortured. At least not yet. But protesting in Hong Kong, you've got to be really brave to do that. And we don't have to be that brave to protest. We have to raise our bravery threshold up a notch or two. When I got arrested, it was an inconvenience. It was no more than that. I didn't feel that I was going to get beaten up in the cell. I didn't feel that I was going to get, a load of trumped up charges were going to come out of nowhere. I wasn't refused legal help or anything like that, and I fully expected to be released quickly, and I was, But freedom has to be defended every step of the way, and I've been thinking about this for a very long time, and I've not been protesting as long as that. I let it slide like everybody else for a very long time before I tried to do something about it. And maybe that's unforgivable. Maybe I deserve this because I didn't stand up earlier. I mean, I would have been in my mid to late teens when I began to realise that living in a free country was something out of the ordinary, that it wasn't normal, that it was exceptional. We were still deep in the Cold War then, so Western capitalism could trumpet itself as a counterpoint to the barbarism of communism. And reading Orwell's 1984 was one of the impulses for one of the first times I began to realise how that might play out in the real world. And I also read a book that I've mentioned before, which is Freedom in the Individual and the Law, which is a legal book about the state of freedom. That was in the 80s. And, you know, I believe there are updated versions now, probably a much fatter book, I should think now. And so I've always been sensitive to this kind of stuff. And lately I've been on a hair trigger. In the last 6 months, you know, I've just been seeing dangers all around. They're taking away the freedoms. And, you know, there is enormous evidence to suggest that freedoms are just given up and then they're not returned. And this is our complacency. This is what people think, how they think. They think about these new rules as if it's completely normal for the government to tell you who you can meet or that you can go and visit your friends. And it isn't normal. It isn't normal at all. Although having said that, historically, and if you take the worldwide, take things worldwide, it probably is normal. But it's not normal in the West. It's not normal in Britain, in England. But this stuff has to be maintained and it has to be fought for at the risk of ridicule and at the risk of arrest and at the risk of financial ruin. The price of liberty, wrote Benjamin Franklin, I think, is eternal vigilance. And we haven't been vigilant. We've been complacent. And maybe that's why we deserve what we're getting. And the people clamouring for lockdowns and dutifully wear their masks, they don't. It's not because they're evil. It's not even because they're stupid, you know. It's because they don't see that giving in to these small things means giving in to a bigger thing. Having given in on masks, we are now rewarded with another lockdown. And this is just going to eviscerate the middle class. You know, I mean, it's not the middle and the working class. You know, it's not, you know, let's leave aside the theories, the alternative theories about why this is happening in the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset and whatever all of those things might be and how credible they might be. What is happening is the same thing that happened in the financial crisis, is a massive transfer of wealth from the bulk of the population to the 1%. You know, Jeff Bezos is probably $100 billion richer than he was at the start of this. You know, because everybody buys things on Amazon, because you can't go to the shops. You know, and they're trying to get us to live life online, as if that's life. The tax on public gathering and travel and driving and just going where you please. Anyway, we mustn't despair. You know, there's a lot of support out there for our side, and there's a lot of people questioning. But we've got to start bringing other people into our orbit, and staying in our own echo chambers is making no difference whatsoever. You know, it's just polarised. There's us, and then there's the rest of society. You know, so I was thinking of doing, making some leaflets highlighting the economic damage above everything else, and then mentioning at the end how the disease isn't that serious and there's a serious risk to our civil liberties. That's what I was thinking of doing. Now, if anybody's got any ideas on how to do that, just leave it in the comments, you know. And I was also thinking of doing a live session, you know, because try and get some sort of feedback from people, because we've got to move this out of our own echo chambers. We've got to. You know, there are serious scientific minds coming around to our point of view, you know, so we should take some encouragement from that, and we've got to keep banging away. Yeah, I don't have a great deal else to say. Hopefully I can come up with something a bit more inspiring next time. See ya.